The reading we're going to have is a very familiar passage about Maundy Thursday, and I know it's only Wednesday, but over these 3 days that I'm here, I felt God calling me to look at the way that God was preparing for the events of Good Friday, for the events of the crucifixion and the resurrection. God didn't stop preparing. God has been preparing from before creation started. And yesterday, those of you that were here remember that we thought about the woman who poured the alabaster flask of perfume over Jesus' head in preparation for his burial, because there wouldn't be time following his death to do just that, which is why the women came to the well. So I've gone on a day or so in that last week to this story, and we're going to see how this story also talks about the preparation that God has made and is making for the events of Good Friday. Sorry about the mic, it's banging on my waist. So, on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" He replied, "Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, 'The teacher says, my appointed time is near. I am going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house.'" Quite interesting, isn't it? So the disciples did as Jesus had directed him and prepared the Passover. When the evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." They were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, "Surely not I, Lord." Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it was written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." And Jesus answered, "Yes, it is you." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and offered it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Now, we had a communion service yesterday. I could have done it then. We've got Maundy Thursday tomorrow. I could have done it then, but God sometimes takes us out of our comfort zones to help us to look at some of these in a context which is not entirely familiar. As Jesus shares this Passover meal with his 12 disciples, the very meal is reminding him of the meticulous planning that has gone into what is about to happen. It's true that Jesus went on, of course, to reinterpret elements of the meal. But the meal spoke of the celebration of the deliverance of God's people in the past, a deliverance from slavery. And I think this passage speaks, therefore, of faithful deliverance, the faithful deliverance of God that he chooses to remind us of from time to time. For the Jews, of course, it was a time of coming out of slavery. Slavery in Egypt all those years before. But that, of course, would be a very fitting image of what Jesus was about to achieve on the Friday. Paul puts it this way: we were in slavery under the basic principles of the world. But when the time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, under the law, to redeem us, that we might receive the full rights of sons of God. A picture of faithful deliverance in the past, pointing to a picture of faithful deliverance in the future. And Jesus, if not the disciples, saw the continuity of that story. It's not a story of the past which is unrelated to the present or the future. It's a story which echoes what is going on in the present and the future. And if you think back to that Passover event, and the events, if we're honest, are quite gory and quite horrific. But so was the conditions of the Israelites at the time. It was tied up with the blood of a lamb being posted on a doorframe, which enabled the angel of death to pass over the household behind. And wherever that was not present, then the firstborn died. And of course, the imagery Jesus was able to see only too clearly, even if the disciples were not. He, the firstborn, not only in human terms, but also the eternal Son of God, would become that perfect lamb sacrifice for us all over a short period, just a short number of hours later. And that would result from our delivery from slavery to freedom. But you know, also that reminder was key to something else. It reminded that what was about to happen wasn't just suddenly decided upon. It had been a plan going back from even before that time of the Israelites in Egypt. The plan that went back even before creation itself. And what was happening now in these final days was, if you like, the fine-tuning of the events that were needed. What was happening was not unknown to God. It was continuing and was being made clear. For Jesus, I often wonder about those final days. We see a little bit of the anguish he goes through in Gethsemane. But I mean, many of you, I'm sure, have faced up to times of difficulty that you know are coming. Maybe it's a big operation or something, or an impending death in the family. And it's quite difficult. You find yourself with very difficult and mixed and sometimes strange emotions and feelings and senses. Jesus was fully human. And therefore he would have gone through those same sorts of things at the time. And we don't always see it, except we catch that glimpse, perhaps, in Gethsemane. But so many of the events of this last week are almost reassuring from his Father. I said yesterday that pouring of the perfume on his head was not something I think that Jesus expected. It was, if you like, an exorbitant gift from his Father, reminding him that, yes, he was to die, but this was all part of a much bigger plan and to strengthen him. And certainly as we look back, we can find that degree of strengthening. It's interesting in that passage that Jesus says, I have eagerly desired to eat the Passover with you before I suffer. Of all the things he was going to do in those hours before he would surrender his life, he was keen to eat this Passover meal. And I think it's because of the familiarity, as well as the prophecy of that in their strength, he drew also his strength from that remembrance of God's plan that he was there at the center of. Remembrance, it seems to me, is a very important act. And Jesus calls us all to use acts of remembrance to bring those past events into our present and into our future. Not that the present or the future are exact copies of the past. You think of the similarity between, or the dissimilarities between the Passover and Jesus' death. There are similarities and there are marked dissimilarities there. But the God behind the past is also the unchanging God there in the present and there in the future. And God's blessings from the past help us sometimes to reimagine that present and that future. And as if Jesus can imagine what he is going to go through from those events in the past, as different as they were, he would be hung on a cross. But he gained strength from that. I don't know if you can think of episodes in your lives when it's like that. When you've drawn on the past. It may have been your conversion experience. Maybe you're one of those fortunate, like my wife was, who can never remember a time when she never knew God. But for most of us, there is a time when we suddenly come into that realism. And in times of difficulty, we look back on that and say, yes, God was there. God hasn't changed. God is still here with me now in whatever I'm facing. I suppose it came over to me afresh a couple of years ago when my wife died. We'd had quite a traumatic 6 months. If I say she died of pancreatic cancer, those of you in the know will know what a difficult cancer that is. About this time, 3 years ago, she'd had a major operation and 3 organs removed. Within 5 months, she died, and she went down very, very rapidly at the end, over a week. It was a very traumatic time in itself. And yet, when I was still running a parish at the time, and I had a wonderful archdeacon who came and took the service, but as I was thinking of the preparation for that service, the thought came back to me of what had happened to us 50 years before. I was a young Christian at the time, and my wife had been, as I say, a Christian for as far as she knew all her life. And we were both going into teaching. And at that stage, as you go into teaching, I don't know if it's still true, I suspect it might be, we had to go for a medical. Now, my medical was fairly superficial. They took my blood pressure. You're well, aren't you? And I was fit and healthy. Great. Pastor, I had a lovely chat for 10, 15 minutes when GPs had time on their hands, seems to be. My wife went off to someone, and for some reason, he did a thorough search. And he was poking around and looking increasingly curious. And then he said to her something quite darkly. He said, "What are your plans?" And she said, "Oh, I'm getting married in 3 months' time." He said, "Yes, I will get on and do that if I was you." He had found in her something, a lump in her chest that he couldn't explain. This was before scans and everything. He referred her rapidly to her GP, got rapidly to a consultant, and before we knew, she was on the operating table. They did not know what they were going to find. And I sat there in ignorance, I suppose. About 11 o'clock at night, I got a call from her father, who of course was her next of kin at that stage, saying, They've operated on her, and they found a massive growth on her pancreas. It proved to be benign, but they said at the time, if she'd have been a year or two older, we'd have just stitched her back up. If it had been a few months later, we wouldn't have been able to do anything. Now, as a young Christian at the time, I was trying to get into good habits, and I was just reading my Bible, and I've been reading through Psalms. And so I thought, well, I must actually look at the Word of God. This was about 11:30 at night. And I opened it to the next Psalm, which I was due to read. And if you can show this one up. This was what I read. May the Lord answer you when you are in distress. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and grant you support from Zion. May he remember all your sacrifices and accept your burnt offerings. And verse 4, may he give you the desire of your heart and make all your plans succeed. We will shout for joy when you are victorious and lift up our banners in the name of God. May the Lord grant all your requests. I said at her funeral, I don't remember what I asked God for, but he gave me 50 years with Ross. So why am I to grieve her going now when I could have lost her 50 years ago? And that's what I mean about bringing remembrances from the past into the present. She was healed in the past, she wasn't healed this time. The situation changes, but the faithfulness and the thanksgiving to God is exactly the same. We gave thanks for her recovery then. We gave thanks and praise for her life at her funeral. And the praise in that church was phenomenal. I hadn't realized till the end that the service went on for 2 hours, and it wasn't a West Indian service. That was a wonderful time, and it's been a real strength to me ever since. I like to think that Jesus drew something of the same from celebrating that Passover, remembering God's faithfulness in the past that would carry him through. And of course, through Christ's faithfulness on the cross, we too can be carried through. So maybe God will help you as you think back over some of the times when he has been a particular blessing and help to you, and bring those events in reality into your present when they are needed.